a given client brainstorm a particular topic have taken all day doing this. Other times, time constraints require that we do it in 20 minutes or a half an hour. But the goal is to try to get as much raw material onto the page or onto the screen as you can. And then you give it shape. And there's an old adage in television news. As Ali was saying before, I was a White House television correspondent for a number of years. I was a television journalist and anchorman in other places in addition to that. And in television news, we've always said, tell them what you are going to tell them, and then tell them what that thing is, and then remind them what you just told them. And so this is the essential structure that I'm talking about here. What you do is you take all of your brainstorming, and you look at all of that raw data on the screen, and you say to yourself, if I could only tell this audience one thing, what would that one thing be? And you make a very, very difficult decision as to what that one unique thing would have to be. And you write that down on this sheet under message number 1. You say to yourself, if I could only tell them one thing, and then the fire alarm in the building went off and we all had to leave and I couldn't tell them anything else, what is that one thing that I would tell this audience? And then you do it again 2 more times. And in so doing, you've created the 3 core messages that serve as the backbone, the heart of your presentation, right? You've got 3 messages, and here you, in what we call the preview, you tell the audience what you're going to tell them. Today I'm going to tell you 3 things. And then the next step is you elaborate on each of those 3 things. You'll see these 3 sheets on your screen here that say the body. On each of these sheets, you would write down, once again, at the top of the sheet in the small rectangle, you would write the messages, message 1, 2, and 3. And then below those messages at the top, you fill in all of the supporting information, effectively all of the information that's left over from your brainstorming process. You will find, when you go back to your brainstorming sheet, that there will, of course, be a lot of information still on the sheet that did not fit into just the message itself, and you will find that there is a place, there is a home for all of this remaining information somewhere under each of the 3 messages, right? So once you've done this, once you've created your preview and your body, you have the middle of your presentation. And then the most important decision that you have to make in the creation of the content of a presentation comes, and that is your opening. And it's absolutely essential for you to start strong. How many times have you been to a presentation where the speaker will come out and he'll tap the microphone and he'll say, is this thing working? Can everybody hear me in the back? And then he'll say something like, okay, everybody, well, I guess it's time to get started, and maybe he'll clear his throat, and he'll say and ah a couple of times, and he'll say, you know, it's great to be here today, gee, it's awfully hot here today, something like that, a very, very conventional sort of opening. I believe very strongly that if you can come up alternatively with some kind of opening that really, really seizes the attention, the imagination of your audience first, it's better. This is not to say that you should not introduce yourself. This is not to say that you shouldn't do all of the polite things that you would normally do in this kind of situation, but I'm just asking you to look at it a bit differently. I'm actually, what I often do when I begin a presentation is to start with a strong opening, and then I introduce myself. And I'll give you an example of that now. My colleagues at Oratorio and I do a lot of work with the World Bank here in Washington and around the world. And one of our clients of the bank is an economist who works on natural disaster issues, the ways in which natural disasters affect developing economies. And so he recently began a presentation like this. He put this, without even saying good morning, He put this image up on the screen and he said, "This is a tale of two countries." As you can see, the country on the left has a very, very unhealthy ecosystem. There's barely a tree left on the hillside. There, it looks as though it was the victim of a terrible drought or perhaps a forest fire. But literally inches away, across an international border, you will see on the right-hand side of the screen a perfectly healthy, verdant forest ecosystem that's home to birds and wildlife of all kinds. How can this be? How can it that two countries that are right next to each other, which after all suffer from the same kinds of natural disasters like earthquakes and forest fires and mudslides, how can they look so different? And by the way, to those of you who are wondering which these two countries are, this is Haiti on the left-hand side and the Dominican Republic on the right-hand side on the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean. And the answer to that question comes in the report that I have written called Natural Hazards and Natural Disasters, the Economics of Effective Prevention. In other words, the Haitian government is not equipped to deal with natural disasters in a way that the government of the Dominican Republic is able to. And so in other words, when he begins his presentation that way, you're immediately seized by it. You see the photograph of the hillside and you say to yourself, what is that? And you begin to listen to the speaker tell his story, and he engages you immediately that way. And then he tells you why he has just shown you this photograph. In this case, it's because he's going to introduce a report that he's just given. And so in this case, he began with that, and then he introduced himself, said, "Good morning, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me," that kind of thing. So how are you going to do it? How are you going to get the audience's attention? How are you going to crystallize for the audience what your point is, and how are you going to tell them what's in it for them, right? It's absolutely essential that you get their attention at the beginning. Really, studies have shown that you only have about 30 seconds or so to grab their attention, to take charge. If you don't get their attention at the very beginning, it's very tough for you to win their attention back. So one way you might get their attention is to tell a story, or to show a very, very arresting image. Or perhaps you could hold up a prop. You might have an iPhone in your hand and say, this iPhone is now used by X million people around the world, or just any kind of device that helps you to make the audience say, this presenter is different, I want to listen to the rest of what he has to say. And then you tell them what the point is, I'm telling you this, I'm showing you this for this particular reason, and then you tell them what's in it for them. Why should they care about this particular piece of information? So now you have 2/3 of your presentation. You've created the middle, you have a powerful opening, and now it's important for you to close strongly as well. And this is the last sheet. Once again, you'll see that it says reiterate, the ask, and memorable parting words. And as I said before, quite simply, we want you, when you are closing, to reiterate your key messages. As I said before, you want to tell them what you're going to tell them, you want to tell them that thing, and you want to remind them of what you've told them. So at the beginning of the end of your presentation, you remind them of what your 3 key messages were. And then you tell them what you want them to do with the information, right? If I were running for President of the United States at this point in the presentation, I would say, please vote for me on November the 6th. Obviously, it doesn't have to be as explicit as that. It can be something like, I'd like for you to consider these ideas as we move forward together and perhaps get back to me by next Wednesday with questions or suggestions you may have. But this is your opportunity to give your audience a job, give your audience a task, right? And then finally, memorable parting words. Just the way you must begin the presentation strong, you have to end strong. You don't want to just say, well, that's it, I think I'm finished speaking here, right? If you're going to begin with a powerful opening, what's a powerful closing you can deliver? In many cases, I find it useful to somehow return to what I began the presentation with. We call that bookending, right? If I begin with a story about Haiti and the Dominican Republic, maybe at the end of my presentation, I'll revisit Haiti and the Dominican Republic and talk about something that may have changed in the past 6 months, for example. What's a strong way that you can deliver your presentation, right? So you've got your opening, you've got your preview, you've got your body, which consists of your 3 main points, and then finally, you've got your closing. So now I'd like to talk about something that most of us probably suffer from, and that is called stage fright. One of the most common questions I get, of course, as someone who works with officials to show them how to give better presentations, how to deal with television appearances, those kinds of things, is they say, I get very nervous, right? It's a very, very common sort of human emotion. It's the fight or flight response. Most of us, it's probably safe to say, don't really love public speaking. So how do you deal with that? If you get nervous before any kind of public speaking kind of situation, how do you deal with your nerves? Well, a very famous American television journalist once told me that all of us get butterflies. And by what I mean by that is here in the States, we say you get butterflies in your stomach. You feel very, very nervous. So the objective is to train the butterflies to fly in formation, right? Harness that nervous energy and turn it into positive energy. And so here are a few tips for helping yourself to do that. And this will sound quite elementary also, but it's absolutely the #1 most effective way that I have found for dealing with nerves, and that simply is to practice. In other words, once you've created your presentation, don't just say, well, I've got my presentation, maybe I'll look at it quietly a couple of times before I go deliver it tomorrow. No, that's not effective. What you need to do is take the presentation and go into a room someplace and shut the door and stand and deliver the presentation out loud as many times as you can. Once again, we're all very, very busy people. It's not often easy to find time to do this when you consider all of your other responsibilities. But if you can do this, if you can practice, if you can repeat the practice as much as possible, the information will become second nature to you, and your nerves will generally be soothed by that because you'll know where you're going. There's no sort of mystery about what you need to say next. You will have the self-confidence that comes from knowing your material very well. And then another thing that I do to calm my nerves is a breathing exercise. There are many different kinds of breathing exercises that you can research online, but one that I do that I find very, very effective is simply the following. I inhale to a count of 5. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. And then I exhale to a count of 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I do 10 repetitions of that. And I'm not a physician, and therefore I don't quite know what's going on physiologically when I do this. I think it may calm the heart rate. It may do something to excite the endorphins in your brain. I'm not quite sure what happens, but it's useful. It helps you to have a certain calm before you stand and deliver any form of public speak. So that's 2 things, simply to practice, to try the breathing exercises, and finally, I employ visualization. Visualization also takes a number of different forms, but to me, I think about professional athletes or Olympic athletes who do this. Sports psychologists will tell you that before a sprinter puts his feet into the blocks, or before a professional basketball player stands at the foul line before taking a foul shot, that athlete will visualize himself succeeding at what he's about to do.